Serafina. I opened my eyes, careful not to disturb the man who had become my entire world. Adrian was already awake, propped up against the pillows, his body a warm, immovable anchor beside me. He wasn't looking at me, though. His gaze, usually so sharp and calculated, was soft, anchored entirely on the carved mahogany crib pulled close to the bed, where Lionel, our 2-month-old son, lay fast asleep. I watched the intensity of my husband's love reflected in his eyes. It was a revelation every morning. It wasn't the demanding, possessive fire that Matteo had always projected. It was a quiet, almost reverent awe. Adrian didn't just love me. He revered the family we had forged, a fragile, brilliant thing he had fought to protect before he'd ever had the right to call me his. I felt chosen, not owned. That distinction was the universe. "He smells like milk and possibility," Adrian whispered, his Spanish accent thicker in the morning stillness. He didn't turn, yet he was completely aware of my awakened presence. I slid closer, resting my head back on his shoulder, my arm draped possessively over his torso. I felt the powerful tension of the man who ran 2 empires, yet right now, he was just a father. "He's dreaming about overthrowing a small government, probably. It's genetic. A Dorian trait, you know." Adrian chuckled, the sound deep and resonant, vibrating pleasantly against my cheek. He shifted slightly, gathering me into the cradle of his arm, his thumb tracing the soft skin just above the emerald wedding ring that now gleamed on my finger. "He's magnificent, Serafina. Every inch of him, even the parts that, biologically speaking, belong to a fool. The mention of Matteo was an intrusion, a necessary shadow, but it couldn't touch the foundation of our bond. Our intimacy was built on a foundation of shared trauma and complementary strength, always pivoting back to the joy we shared. Our wedding had been a public, powerful statement. Our true marriage was these small, profound moments. "I was thinking," I murmured, tilting my chin up to meet his gaze, "about how I was terrified when I first got to know that I was pregnant. Terrified that if Matteo found out, he would use him as a chain to bring me back." I kept hearing Anastasia's voice, the coldness of that blue room, the humiliation. Adrian's expression hardened, his eyes darkening with a fierce devotion that always chased the ghosts away. He lowered his head, his lips feather-brushing mine, in a slow, patient kiss that built in intensity until it became a silent, protective vow. "He will never be a chain. He is a gift. He is mine. Ours." He pulled back just enough to look into my eyes, his thumb stroking my jawline. "I need to make this ironclad, my love. More than just by choice, which is the only thing that matters to me, but legally. I spoke with your father's consigliere, Mr. Conti. Today the papers are drawn up. I want to file the petition for adoption. For Lionel Dorian Vasquez." A warm, dizzying rush flooded my chest. It was a feeling far more profound than any rush of power or victory. Adrian wanted to erase every legal trace of Verrelli's influence. He wanted to officially claim the child who was already his son in every meaningful way. "Adrian," I breathed, touching his strong cheek. The skin beneath my fingers was warm, smooth, and utterly trustworthy. "You don't have to. Everyone knows you're his father in every way that counts." "I know that," he confirmed, leaning down to claim my mouth with a deep tenderness that spoke of forever. "But I want Matteo Verrelli to understand, on paper and in perpetuity, that he has no legal claim on the most valuable thing I possess. I want the judge to call him Adrian Vasquez's son, Because that's the truth of his destiny. I want to put a final legal seal on my commitment to you and to him." I kissed him back, a long, languid kiss that stretched the boundaries of our morning peace. I shifted my body over his, our limbs tangling, the gentle rhythm of our breathing mirroring the quiet rise and fall of Leonel's tiny chest nearby. The tension of the last few months, the struggle for control, the wedding, the constant threat, all melted away in the heat of our intimate connection. "This is how every morning should feel," I whispered against his skin, my hands tracing the firm muscles of his shoulders. "Like the world can't touch us." "The world can't touch us," Adrian confirmed, his voice rough with emotion and desire, his hands finding the familiar curve of my waist and pulling me closer. "Not when we're like this." We were downstairs hours later, the routine of power settling comfortably around us in the sunlit breakfast room. Adrian was holding Lionel, bouncing him gently while discussing a major logistics merger with one of my father's consiglieres, Mr. Conti. Antonio Dorian's health had deteriorated enough that Adrian was now seamlessly handling the majority of high-level affairs. I was reviewing the foundation documents, listening with half an ear to the strategic discussion. The grand front door of the estate opened, shattering the sense of normalcy with a harsh, violent snap. A sleek black town car, not one of ours, pulled into the courtyard. A lawyer, stiff and meticulously dressed in a suit that screamed corporate opportunism, hurried toward the house, flanked by two anonymous, heavy-set men who looked entirely out of place on Dorian grounds. "Who is that?" I asked, my blood turning to ice. My hand instantly found the familiar, cold comfort of the weapon holstered at my hip. The peace was over. Adrian, always the fortress, handed Lionel carefully to his nanny without looking away from the threat. He stepped forward. "An unwelcome messenger." The lawyer approached the threshold, stopping short of crossing the line. His face was pale as he recognized us, the infamous Doña Serafina Dorian, and the newly ascended Adrian Vasquez. He was terrified to be here. "Doña Serafina," the lawyer stammered, holding out a thick manila envelope sealed with a court stamp. "These documents were filed this morning, under the authority of Mr. Matteo Verrelli and his counsel. They are sealed and require immediate review." Adrian intercepted the envelope before I could move. His sheer presence seemed to bear down on the man. "Deliver a message back to Mr. Verrelli and his counsel." Adrian's voice was low, smooth, and laced with absolute ice. "Tell them that Lionel Dorian Vasquez is not available for their games." The lawyer retreated instantly. I walked to Adrian, placing a hand on his back. "What is it, Adrian?" He broke the seal, pulling out the documents. The titles were stark, cold, and immediate, attacking the very core of my new life. Petition for paternity establishment. Motion for emergency access and visitation. Order for compulsory genetic testing. Adrian skimmed the legal jargon. "He's going for the jugular, Serafina. He is citing your reckless lifestyle, association with known criminal entities, and multiple threats against your life, as grounds to demand supervised visitation immediately. And he's filed a motion for the court to mandate a paternity test to confirm his rights." "He has no rights," I hissed, my voice trembling with rage as I snatched the page demanding the genetic test from Adrian's hand. "He is a murderer and a traitor. He gave me away. He signed the divorce papers. He forfeited his claim the day he gave me up to my father. He's using the law, Serafina, the law that doesn't see Don Verrelli's poison or Castellano's ambition. It only sees a biological father demanding access to his child. And we have to play his game perfectly, or we risk losing Lionel to the state system long enough for Matteo to cause irreversible damage." Adrian gripped my shoulders, his face a mask of iron determination. The most insidious detail, tucked away on the third page, was a court date, a preliminary hearing set for the following week. Far too fast for us to properly prepare a comprehensive defense against the combined legal muscle of Matteo and Castellano's funding. I looked up at Adrian, the sunshine morning extinguished by the stark, terrifying reality of the legal war we now faced. Matteo had found the one way to wound us most deeply, attacking the very foundation of the family we were fighting to build. The court date, Adrian stated, his jaw tight. If we don't show, we forfeit. And if we show, we submit to his test. I stared at the documents, my sense of safety instantly stripped away. I had survived ambushes and taken lives, but a custody battle for my son felt like the most terrifying, insidious threat yet. My hand found Adrian's, a silent promise. "We fight him, Adrian," I whispered, tearing the papers in half, the sound a ragged echo of the morning's peace shattering. "We fight him until there's nothing left of him. We start today. We find the leverage that kills his claim forever. Serafina." The remains of the custody papers lay scattered on the marble floor, a tangible symbol of the domestic peace Matteo had just brutally shattered. I didn't waste breath on anger. Fury was a luxury. What I needed now was cold, precise focus. This wasn't a matter of hurt feelings or pride. It was a matter of survival and the absolute safety of my son. Adrian simply moved, his actions speaking a volume of support that promises never could. He led me away from the exposed front hall and down into the secure, soundproofed library, our shared war room. "The first rule of war, mia cara," Adrian said, his voice low and steady as he poured a tumbler of dark amber liquid. "We anticipate, but we don't react. We hit where he thinks he's safest." I accepted the glass, the heat spreading quickly through my hand, matching the controlled fire in my core. "He thinks his biology is his armor. We know better. Matteo is weak. He's impulsive. He needs Castellano's money, and he needs a quick win to prove he's still a threat. We cut off the oxygen." Adrian nodded once. We were perfectly matched in our ruthlessness. We spent the rest of the day and deep into the night submerged in the endless, excruciating paper trail of the Verrelli empire. Adrian had secured all financial records after Don Verrelli's death, but the key document, the heart of the family's true hidden business, was the physical ledger bound in worn leather, now spread across the immense mahogany table. Under the harsh, focused light, the elegant script detailing decades of illicit transactions looked deceptively innocent. The room felt dense with history, secrets, and the palpable tension of two people hunting for a phantom. "We are looking for anomalies, not fraud," Adrian instructed, his Spanish inflection precise. "Matteo is stupid, but his accountants were professional. They would never risk a major, obvious discrepancy that would flag international regulators." He was right. Matteo was too greedy for the long game and too unintelligent for a clean, sophisticated siphon of billions. He preferred immediate, shallow gratification. As the hours blurred, Lionel was soundly asleep upstairs, protected by multiple layers of security. My eyes burned, jumping from column to column. I ignored the millions passing through legitimate real estate and logistics, focusing instead on the footnotes and the operational expense columns where legitimate businesses mask illegitimate payoffs. I finally found a pattern: hundreds of small petty drains. Over the last 5 years of Don Verrelli's life, Matteo had been steadily diverting profits from minor diversified ventures: a local construction supply company, a chain of laundromats, a minor shipping route, all under the guise of maintenance and security. "Look at this," I whispered, my voice rough, my pen dragging a line down the column of figures. 40,000 here, 65,000 there. It adds up to nearly 3 million in 5 years. He was paying for his lifestyle. He was stealing table scraps. Adrian leaned over me, his cheek brushing my hair as he studied my notes. His proximity, even here, was a profound jolt of adrenaline and desire. Petty theft, but it's still theft, Adrian affirmed, his voice growing cold. It shows motive, intent, and a profound lack of respect for the business. More importantly, it was all funneled through 3 key associates who signed off on the expenses: Luca Rossi, Elena Bianchi, and Marco Bellini. Adrian pushed himself up and walked to the wall of windows, looking out into the pitch-black night. Matteo guaranteed their careers, and they guaranteed his silence. If we hit them, Matteo loses his entire support structure outside of Castellano. His testimony will be worthless if his entire witness pool is compromised. Rossi is facing a major city sanitation bid, I supplied instantly, already planning the attack. Bianchi is launching a huge luxury condo tower that requires zoning variances this month. Adrian turned, a slow, predatory smile spreading across his face. It was the look of a hawk spotting its prey, and it made my breath hitch. This was the man whose ruthless intelligence made him lethal. "Perfect," he said, his eyes glittering. He pulled out his satellite phone, a device only he and a handful of trusted contacts possessed, and began to work. He didn't use threats, he used information and leverage, the true currency of our world. First, Rossi. A single brief call, speaking Spanish in swift-coded phrases. He wasn't talking about Rossi's theft. He was talking about an environmental impact report Rossi's company had falsified years ago. Information that, if leaked on the morning of his bid, would kill his career instantly. Next, Bianchi. Italian, brief. He simply mentioned the name of the zoning commissioner and the phrase, contratti non puliti, unclean contracts. The hint alone was enough to ensure Bianchi's variances would be denied indefinitely, crippling her project. Finally, Bellini, the lawyer. A call to a contact in the district attorney's office, suggesting a highly detailed look into Bellini's offshore holdings for unreported assets. Not a crime yet, but enough to freeze his ability to assist Matteo legally. I watched, mesmerized, as Adrian systematically dismantled 3 people's lives in under 10 minutes, all without raising his voice or leaving the room. He was a force of nature, precise, decisive, and entirely devoted to the outcome, protecting his family. When he was done, he placed the phone down. "They will be busy fighting their own fires by morning," he said. "Matteo's lawyers will find their key witnesses suddenly unavailable or facing federal scrutiny. They will know who did it, but they won't be able to prove anything." I walked toward him, my admiration overwhelming the exhaustion. I loved that he protected me, not by hiding me, but by fighting beside me. "You're magnificent, Adrian Vasquez," I whispered, sliding my arms around his waist. He leaned down, his kiss possessive and thorough, fueled by the adrenaline of the attack and the sheer joy of our shared victory. "We are magnificent, Serafina Dorian Vasquez, together." Our moment of triumph was violently interrupted. I turned back to the ledger one last time, needing to secure the evidence, when a loose page tucked into a deep crease I hadn't noticed before fluttered out onto the table. It was a separate, brittle slip of paper, hidden from the main records. It wasn't a record of petty theft. It was a single, cryptic bank draft for a colossal sum, far exceeding anything Matteo had stolen, dated just 1 week before Don Verrelli's death. The payee was simply Laboratorio di Tossicologia di Messina, a chemical toxicology laboratory in Sicily, Stamped across the top of the draft were the handwritten, unmistakable initials, M.V. My breath hitched, cold terror seizing my throat. This wasn't just proof of theft. It was the financial trail of a murder, hiding in plain sight. Matteo had paid to cover up the poisoning of his own father. "Adrian," I choked out, clutching the paper, my voice barely audible. He spun around. He took the paper, his eyes scanning the name of the lab and the date. His composure was shattered instantly. "This is it," he breathed, his voice flat with lethal realization. "This is the smoking gun that proves he paid to cover up the poison." A frantic, desperate knock echoed on the library door. Before either of us could react, one of the security guards burst in, his face pale and glistening. "Doña Serafina, Don Adrian, we have a problem," he gasped. "A courier just arrived. It's not from the court. It's a box. They said if you don't play the message, you forfeit his only chance to communicate with his son before the hearing." He held up a small, velvet-covered box containing a single flash drive. The tag read, "To Lionel, my truth." Adrian stared at the flash drive, his expression a terrifying mix of fury and fear. Matteo knew exactly how to twist the knife, forcing us to choose between safety and the potential for crucial information. "Adrian, don't!" I whispered, my voice laced with panic, terrified of what manipulative message Matteo could have recorded. Adrian's eyes met mine, cold steel meeting frantic emerald. He was already calculating the risk. "He knows we have the murder proof now, Serafina. He murder-proof. He's counting on us to watch it. He's counting on us to believe it's safe. But what if it's not?" He grabbed the drive, his thumb running over the velvet case, the bank draft for the Sicilian lab still clutched in his other hand. "Get the secure air-gapped machine from the server room," Adrian commanded the guard. "We watch it now. We don't wait for the lawyers or the bomb squad. We see what the fool wants, and then we destroy him." I watched him plug the drive into the sterile machine, the ominous glow of the screen reflecting in his determined eyes. We had just found the evidence to prove murder, only to be immediately drawn into a forced confrontation with a desperate, cornered man. My hand found Adrian's, a silent promise to face the incoming blow together. The computer screen flickered to life, showing a darkened room, and then, slowly, chillingly, the face of Matteo Verrelli. Serafina. We didn't talk about the council, the Verrelli ledger, or Adrian's position after the screen went black. The political and legal threats suddenly seemed distant, secondary to the sheer violating intimacy of the video Matteo had sent. He hadn't used the flash drive to deliver a physical threat, but something far worse. A simple, insidious message to our son. The message was brief, barely 2 minutes long, a monologue addressed to infant Lionel, promising the child he would be rescued from the violent hands of his mother and the mercenary greed of Adrian. It was a manipulative, poisonous fairy tale where Matteo was the hero and we were the villains. It was pure psychological warfare, and it had left a residue of moral filth on the air. Adrian had been furious, but he had merely tossed the drive onto the mahogany table next to the murder evidence. We left the library and retreated upstairs, seeking the only true solace we knew, the quiet certainty of our own space. The exhaustion of the long night, fueled by adrenaline and rage, finally overtook me the moment I settled into our bed. Sleep came, but it was not restorative. It was a plunge into the cold of familiar terror that had haunted me since my first unwanted marriage. I was back in the Blue Room, the guest suite in the Verrelli mansion, where I had been confined during my final humiliating months as Matteo's wife. The walls were the color of cold, dusty ice, and the air was thin with disdain. I wasn't a guest. I was a hostage. The nightmare was always the same. I was standing by the door, pregnant and terrified, listening to the muffled, mocking voices of Matteo and Anastasia Ruffo from the drawing room below. "She's too wild, Matteo. A brute. She'll never make a suitable donna. But she's Dorian, isn't she? Keep her chained just long enough for the inheritance." "Chained, yes. My father insists on the alliance. But as soon as Dorian's health fails, she goes back. She's served her purpose. You, my beautiful Anastasia, are the one I want at my side when I rule." The words were a hammer blow of betrayal, not because they hurt me personally, but because they reduced my life, my heart, my very identity, to a transactional asset. I had been a tool to be used, then discarded. In the dream, the ice-blue walls closed in, and I started to choke. The silence of the house became a roar, amplifying Anastasia's laughter, turning it into a high-pitched, mocking shriek. I awoke violently, my chest heaving, fighting against the invisible chains of the memory. I was instantly bathed in a cold sweat, adrenaline flooding my system, my breath caught in a silent, agonizing sob. "Serafina!" Adrian's voice was the only lifeline. He was awake instantly, not startled, but utterly grounded. He pulled me immediately to his chest, his large, warm hands smoothing the frantic clench of my shoulders. He didn't ask what was wrong. He simply held me, letting the steady, deep rhythm of his heart replace the hysterical drumming of mine. "The blue room!" I choked out, unable to articulate more. "Voices! The betrayal!" He tightened his embrace, burying his face in my hair. His familiar scent, cedar and clean linen, a fierce anchor in the storm. "He used you as a shield, mia cara. He never saw the weapon you were, or the woman you are. He only saw a name. He is the weak one. You are safe now." He kept talking, his voice a low, gravelly vibration that slowly calmed the tremors in my body. He didn't dismiss the pain. He absorbed it, making it his own. "I hate that man for every shadow he cast on your life," Adrian confessed, pulling back slightly to look into my eyes, the silver in his gaze reflecting the bedside lamp's soft glow. His hand, strong and capable, reached up to tenderly brush a tear from my temple. "Every scar he left on your soul, I will dismantle. Every time you remember that coldness, I will replace it with warmth. Every memory of humiliation, I will erase with respect." We lay like that for a long time, the remnants of the nightmare receding under the shield of his promise. Adrian didn't talk about the financial world or the council. He talked about our future, teaching Lionel Spanish, the gardens we would build in the country, the simple, quiet life they would live when the wars were done. He showed me the vulnerable core of his desire, a desire for peace, not power, a home built on choice, not obligation. I reached up, tracing the sharp, powerful lines of his face. "You never left me, did you? Even when you thought I was his wife, you watched over me." "I couldn't abandon you to that coldness," he admitted, his voice rough with remembered pain. "You were fire, trapped in ice. I knew I was in love with you the day I saw you shoot a man in the shoulder, and not flinch. You were more than a woman, you were a warrior. And I decided then I would steal you if necessary, just to see you smile once." His honesty was intoxicating. It was a commitment forged in violence and validated by love. We were two broken pieces that fit together perfectly, stronger and sharper as a unit. Our intimacy that night was a desperate, passionate reaffirmation of that bond, a cleansing fire that burned away the last vestiges of the Verrelli poison. As the first faint light of dawn touched the curtains, we finally found a fragile, shared peace. Adrian held me securely, his breathing even. I felt utterly safe, powerful, and ready for the impending battle. Matteo might have the law on his side, but we had truth, murder evidence, and a terrifying, unbreakable bond. I was just drifting back to sleep, the piece complete, when the secure line on Adrian's dedicated encryption phone, tucked away in the nightstand, began to vibrate. It was a code only used for immediate, high-priority communication with the legal team. Adrian sighed, already knowing the piece was over. He reached for the phone. I watched his eyes narrow as he read the incoming text. He looked at me, his gaze suddenly hard, all the tenderness replaced by focused, predatory steel. "It seems we didn't have as much time as we thought, Serafina. Castellano just got his aligned judge to move the hearing." He slid the phone toward me. The message was stark, a single line of unforgiving legal text that punched the air from my lungs. Ex parte order granted. Mandatory paternity test and temporary supervised custody, pending results. Order executes in 12 hours. Matteo hadn't waited for the preliminary hearing. He had weaponized the court immediately, and now they were coming for Leonel. Serafina. The words on the phone screen felt like a physical assault. Order executes in 12 hours. 12 hours. 12 hours until some state-appointed puppet, backed by Castellano's money and Matteo's biological claim, would step across my threshold and demand custody of my son. Not for a permanent seizure, but for a mandatory paternity test and temporary supervised placement pending the results. It was a perfectly calculated legal maneuver designed to humiliate us and gather ammunition. I slammed the phone down onto the nightstand, and the silence that followed was more violent than any explosion. "No!" I breathed, the word a raw, guttural rejection of reality. I surged out of bed, the last vestiges of sleep and comfort burned away by blinding fury. "We are Dorian. No state, no judge, and certainly no pathetic lawyer aligned with Castellano is going to take my son. Adrian, we lock this estate down. We disappear. We move Lionel to the safe house in the islands immediately." Adrian was already dressed, not in a suit, but in tactical black, the uniform of a man preparing for defense. He had anticipated my reaction, and it was clear from the measured stillness of his posture that he disagreed profoundly. He moved, not toward the door, but toward me, gripping my frantic shoulders. "Look at me, Serafina," he commanded, his eyes stern, pulling my gaze away from the imagined escape routes. "We do not run. Running is what they want. It validates every single word Matteo put in that vile message and every fear he planted in the judge's mind. He is forcing us to submit to his humiliation," I hissed, my hands clenching into fists. "He's forcing the paternity test. We know the results. Adrian, we know the truth of my life with him. We know the betrayal. The second that test comes back, he gains legitimacy, and we lose ground." "Yes, we know the truth," Adrian conceded, his voice dropping to a low, intense rumble. "And we will play this legal game precisely because we know the truth. Matteo and Castellano have backed us into a corner, but their goal is not the child right now. Their goal is to provoke a violent, non-legal response. They want the headlines to read, 'Dorian heir taken by force from unruly mother and mercenary husband.'" He released my shoulders, stepping back to let the weight of his logic land. "We cannot give them that ammunition. We are not fighters in the street anymore, mia cara. We are pillars of a legitimate empire. We fight this not with assassins, but with documents." His words, though cutting, were the sharp truth I needed to hear. My heart was screaming for defiance, but my strategic mind knew Adrian was right. Resisting a court order, even a corrupt one, would be a catastrophic legal mistake. handing Matteo the custody battle on a silver platter. "So we let them win the first move?" I asked, bitterness coating the question. "We let them think they won the first move," Adrian corrected, a dark, calculating look settling over his features. "We comply. We submit to the test. We show the court we are responsible, stable, and compliant parents, thereby neutralizing his entire narrative of our recklessness." "We let them think they won the first move," Adrian corrected, a dark, calculating look settling over his features. "We comply. We submit to the test. We show the court we are responsible, stable, and compliant parents, thereby neutralizing his entire narrative of our recklessness." He walked to his desk, pulling out a meticulously organized folder labeled Verrelli Contingency. "While they are celebrating their small, pathetic victory, we will be using the time they bought us to prepare our counterattack. We will use the fraud, the money laundering, and the toxicology lab evidence we found last night. But we have to wait until we are beyond reproach." We spent the next few hours in a brutal, cold study of the order. The temporary custody arrangement wasn't a complete loss, but it was an egregious act of judicial negligence. The order mandated Lionel would be presented for the DNA collection. However, Adrian's legal team had immediately filed a successful emergency medical motion, arguing that due to Lionel's 3-month age and breastfeeding schedule, any separation beyond the time required for testing, a few hours, constituted a medical risk and a violation of the child's best interest. The motion was quickly granted, modifying the custody provision. The DNA test must proceed, but Lionel must be returned to Serafina immediately afterward. The full custody hearing remained scheduled for the following week. We used the remaining hours to prepare Lionel's travel bag, though now it was only for a short outing. I packed his favorite blanket and a few essentials, each action and exercise in rigid control against the hysterical weeping threatening to surface. Adrian stayed by my side, not offering platitudes, but simply existing as a solid, silent presence of support. "I won't let them hurt him," I whispered, placing a soft, fuzzy bear inside the bag. "They cannot hurt him, Mia cara," Adrian murmured, his hand settling warmly on the back of my neck. "Our lawyers were faster. They can force the test, but they cannot keep him. They have given us exactly what we need, a few hours of enforced separation to buy us the 48 hours we need to destroy them." We moved to the main drawing room an hour before the deadline, watching the clock tick down. Adrian had informed the household staff of the necessity of compliance. The house was quiet, the usual hum of activity muted by anticipation. The black car arrived precisely at the 12-hour mark. 2 individuals emerged, a stern-faced woman in a navy suit, holding a clipboard, who introduced herself as the court-appointed monitor, and a man in a lab coat carrying a secure, refrigerated kit, the DNA collector. The monitor was all business, demanding compliance with the test. I held Lionel close, my heart pounding, but I remained outwardly calm. Adrian stepped forward, his body shielding me. "You will take the sample, and then you will provide us with the chain of custody documentation and the exact name and location of the laboratory processing the test. And pursuant to the modified order," Adrian's voice was smooth and authoritative, "the child is to be returned to his mother's direct care immediately upon completion of the sample collection." The monitor frowned, but nodded, acknowledging the successful medical countermotion. "Understood. The test will be conducted now, and the child is to be returned within 3 hours." The DNA collection was quick, a brief, sterile swab of Lionel's inner cheek. The monitor signed the form, collected her kit, and after ensuring the required legalities were observed, she departed, leaving my son safely in my arms. We watched the unmarked car pull away. The silence was still profound, But this time, it was a silence of relief, not crushing loss. Lionel was fussy, already hungry from the disruption, and I immediately began to soothe him, my body relaxing as his tiny, warm form anchored me to reality. I looked up at Adrian, a single fierce tear finally breaching my control. They dared to touch him. Adrian didn't reach for me. Instead, he reached for his phone, his eyes blazing with a dangerous, lethal focus that promised retribution. Lionel was safe, but the humiliation, the threat, was unforgivable. "Serafina," he said, his voice flat, emotionless, and terrifying. "They thought they won by stealing a few hours. That was their mistake. We have Lionel back, but the court date is still set for next week, and the order is still active until then. The legal game is over now. We move to the field." He looked directly at me, the silver in his eyes turning to molten mercury. "We have the documentation proving his deep financial fraud against the family's minor holdings, Serafina. The one thing the Council of Families hates more than a bastard son is a thief who betrays the trust of the institution. We attack his legitimacy, not just his legal claim. Get me the contact information for the head of the Council of Families. I am calling an emergency session. We are not just defending our son, mia cara. We are changing the power structure forever." Serafina. The anxiety of the last 2 days had been a slow, insidious poison. We were waiting for the inevitable, but the silence of the estate was a heavy, suffocating anticipation. When Adrian's phone chimed, signaling the arrival of the secured legal document, the sound felt like a gunshot. I was at my desk, but my eyes were locked on him. He opened the file, his expression unchanging, and then slowly turned the screen toward me. The white text on the dark background confirmed the scientific truth I had already known. Conclusion: probability of paternity. Matteo Verrelli, 99.999%. "It's done," I stated, my voice devoid of emotion. I pushed the chair back and stood up. "It changes nothing of the emotional truth, or the fact that you are his father, Adrian, but it is the technicality he needed." Adrian immediately crossed the room, his hands gripping my shoulders. "He has a number now, mia cara. He has a fact. It lends credibility to his entire rotten campaign." The speed of Matteo's countermove was breathtaking. Within the hour, the carefully leaked story dropped. It wasn't sophisticated financial journalism. It was a savage tabloid hit job designed for mass consumption and maximum damage to my character. The headline blazed across the screen. "DNA confirms. Dorian heiress Serafina Verrelli attempted to hide her child from father." Adrian read the carefully crafted narrative over my shoulder. Matteo was the grief-stricken, wronged father, only seeking his son after his own father's passing. I was the cruel, vengeful ex-wife who, driven by a lust for power consolidation, with my mercenary husband, Adrian Vasquez, was trying to erase the Verrelli bloodline. They used the suspicious timing of our marriage and Adrian's past to imply Lionel was being raised in a volatile, unstable environment. The truth was twisted expertly. My protective instinct was recast as cold, selfish denial. What hurt most was how insidiously effective the narrative was. It tapped into every modern fear about custody battles, the mother acting out of spite, using the child as a weapon. How could I publicly defend myself against the claim of being an unfit mother without holding up the very shield I desperately wished to protect? Lionel himself? The fight was no longer about a legal document. It was a psychological war for public sympathy, and Matteo was winning the first round by weaponizing sentimentality. "They've painted me as Medea," I spat, throwing the phone onto the velvet chair. "This isn't about the custody hearing anymore, Adrian. It's about the court of public opinion, and right now, I'm the villain who denied a father his son. Then we must stop fighting in the shadows, Adrian determined, his gaze fixed on the library door. We need the dawn. I found my father, Antonio Dorian, frail but lucid, attended by his medical team. The air was sterile, the silence heavy with the gravity of his impending end. Adrian waited outside, giving us our privacy. They are comparing you to a Medea, Serafina. Antonio rasped immediately, not needing an explanation for my presence. The sickness had taken his strength, but the legendary fire in his eyes remained. Disgusting, but predictable. We have the financial fraud, Padre, I told him, kneeling beside his bed. Adrian is ready to strike at his legitimacy using the Verrelli ledger. But I can't stop the PR narrative that I'm unfit because I tried to hide his son. Antonio's thin hand reached out, resting on mine. The touch was cool, but the command was warm. You remember the first lesson of a Dorian, Serafina? We do not seek legitimacy from outside. We are the source of legitimacy. Matteo acts like a beggar, waving his DNA slip as his only claim to power, begging the world to notice him. He fixed me with a gaze that cut through my frustration. A Dorian doesn't need to prove anything to the court, the public, or the council. You are the donna. Lionel is the heir. Adrian is your protector. You must stop hiding. I felt the weight of his legacy settle over me. For centuries, the Dorian family had ruled through subtle force and undeniable consequence. Verrelli power had always been synonymous with shadows and whispered violence. Antonio was telling me to reject the Verrelli model entirely. Don Verrelli taught his son that power is best exercised in darkness, Antonio continued, his voice a dry, rasping whisper that still carried monumental authority. You, Serafina, must teach the world that your power is best exercised in cold, brilliant light. They say you are an unfit mother? Go to the most respected forum. Let them see you. Let them see Lionel Dorian Vasquez held by you, Doña Serafina, his rightful protector, in the full light of day. You want me to take Lionel into the public? I whispered, shocked. That went against every ingrained protective instinct, every lesson I had learned about keeping the family secure. You have hidden him long enough, Antonio declared, his voice gaining a momentary, fierce resonance. Matteo is using the shadows and the tabloids to destabilize you. You must bring Lionel into the light, draped in the Dorian crest. Let the world see the child of the Dorian, the heir of the Verrelli, through your blood. You must embrace the fight publicly, and then Adrian will strike him from below with the financial proof. He leaned back, visibly exhausted by the immense effort, but his eyes were clear, almost luminous. Go now. Tell Adrian to execute his plan against the council. Tell him not to hesitate. This is not about custody. It is about establishing a new dynasty. Go, my daughter. Go and be the Dorian. I found Adrian outside, the command now ringing clearly in my mind. He said we don't hide. We launch your counterattack now, Adrian, and I will make a public appearance with Lionel this week. We meet his PR with ours, a declaration of our undeniable legitimacy. A dangerous excitement flashed in Adrian's eyes. He had been waiting for the final authority to unleash the strategy he had been meticulously constructing for weeks. The emergency session of the Council of Families is already scheduled for tonight, Adrian informed me, pulling out his satellite phone. I took the liberty. The council head believes I am requesting a simple transfer of assets. He doesn't know I am about to deliver a death blow. He pulled the satellite phone from his pocket, his thumb hovering over the dial pad. Before I walk into that room, I have one call to make. Luca Rossi, the accountant. We compromised with the environmental reports. Matteo will lean on him immediately after the PR blitz for quick cash. Adrian's mouth curled into a predatory smile, cold and sharp. Rossi will provide us with the key financial codes Matteo uses for his offshore holdings. If he doesn't, I will ensure he is in prison before the sun rises. Adrian turned his back, affording himself the privacy for the inevitable pressure he was about to apply. I heard the low, intense murmur of his Spanish, the voice of a man making an impossible demand, backed by the full weight of both the Dorian and Vasquez empires. The negotiation was swift, brutal, and utterly one-sided. No es una súplica, Rossi, es una orden. Dame los códigos ahora mismo, o pasarás el resto de tu vida en una celda en Malta, y tu familia pagará por tu silencio. It is not a plea, Rossi. It is an order. Give me the codes right now, or you will spend the rest of your life in a cell in Malta, and your family will pay for your silence. A brief, tense silence followed. Adrian did not break eye contact with the wall. He listened, his jaw tight. Then a slow, terrible grin, the genuine, victorious grin of a wolf, spread across his face. Excelente, Adrian murmured. Send them to the secure line, now, and know that this is the only loyalty you will ever be rewarded for. He disconnected and turned back to me, the victory in his eyes intoxicating. He cracked. Rossi has given us the access codes for the primary shell companies Matteo has been using to hide the stolen funds. When I present the Verrelli ledger and these codes to the council tonight, Matteo won't look like a father demanding access. He will look like a common thief who is embezzling family money to pay off his associates and fight a private custody war. He pulled the satellite phone from his pocket, his thumb hovering over the dial pad. Before I walk into that room, I have one call to make. Luca Rossi, the accountant. We compromised with the environmental reports. Matteo will lean on him immediately after the PR blitz for quick cash. Adrian's mouth curled into a predatory smile, cold and sharp. Rossi will provide us with the key financial codes Matteo uses for his offshore holdings. If he doesn't, I will ensure he is in prison before the sun rises. Adrian turned his back, affording himself the privacy for the inevitable pressure he was about to apply. I heard the low, intense murmur of his Spanish, the voice of a man making an impossible demand, backed by the full weight of both the Dorian and Vasquez empires. The negotiation was swift, brutal, and utterly one-sided. No es una súplica, Rossi, es una orden. Dame los códigos ahora mismo, o pasarás el resto de tu vida en una celda en Malta, y tu familia pagará por tu silencio. It is not a plea, Rossi. It is an order. Give me the codes right now, or you will spend the rest of your life in a cell in Malta, and your family will pay for your silence. A brief, tense silence followed. Adrian did not break eye contact with the wall. He listened, his jaw tight. Then, a slow, terrible grin, the genuine, victorious grin of a wolf, spread across his face. Excelente, Adrian murmured. Send them to the secure line, now, and know that this is the only loyalty you will ever be rewarded for. He disconnected and turned back to me, the victory in his eyes intoxicating. He cracked. Rossi has given us the access codes for the primary shell companies Matteo has been using to hide the stolen funds. When I present the Verrelli ledger and these codes to the council tonight, Matteo won't look like a father demanding access. He will look like a common thief who is embezzling family money to pay off his associates and fight a private custody war. He walked toward me, his hands reaching to cup my face. We have everything we need, Serafina. The council will strip him of his political legitimacy and his access to Verrelli assets tonight. By morning, Matteo Verrelli will be a pauper fighting a custody battle with a handful of state-appointed lawyers and no funding. We will isolate. Anastasia. The view from the penthouse office in Geneva was a crystalline vista of mountains and precision. I stood by the floor-to-ceiling glass, sipping black coffee, my attire a masterwork of tailored neutral wool. I needed to cultivate the image of a woman who had never suffered a setback in her life, who had never been violently disgraced, exiled from the American family structure, and stripped of her engagement ring in a scandal that had made global headlines. They had stripped me of my future, reducing my meticulously constructed identity to that of a pathetic footnote. I didn't feel neutral. I felt like a grenade with the pin pulled and my hand gripping the lever with white-knuckled determination. The deep, agonizing truth was that my revenge was not about the man Matteo, who was proving to be predictably weak, nor was it even about the petty spite of a scorned woman. It was about the loss of status, the theft of my potential, and the crushing public humiliation that had been orchestrated entirely by Serafina Dorian and her mercenary husband, Adrian Vasquez. Serafina hadn't just won. She had systematically reduced me to the failed fiancé, the discarded mistress, a cautionary tale whispered in the drawing rooms of New York and Milan. She had stolen the inheritance, the husband, and the respect I had spent a lifetime earning. Serafina had taken the control, and for me, control was everything. I had to reclaim the narrative, not by fighting for a title, but by proving I was the superior strategist. My objective was clear, surgically precise. I would not engage in any more messy, emotional family drama. I would hit Serafina where the Dorian truly lived, in the flawless execution of power and the sanctity of her financial future. Adrian Vasquez had taken over their European expansion strategy, targeting the lucrative, highly complex Eastern European energy sector. It was Adrian's specialty, which meant it was Serafina's greatest asset. I would take it all. I slid into the plush leather chair opposite my uncle, Don Boris Volkov. The long mahogany table was less a surface for negotiations and more an altar for illicit oaths, laden with maps, complex financial projections, and the sheaf of sealed, notarized contracts that formed the scaffolding of our new empire. Boris, a high-ranking, formidable operative in the Russian Bratva, was a man of quiet, massive power. He was the key to this new alliance. He offered the muscle, the impenetrable logistical pathways, and the deep network of compromised officials that only the local infrastructure, stretching from Kyiv to Moscow, could provide. The air was thick with the scent of old leather and the unspoken cost of his allegiance. My father's name had bought me this meeting. My strategy would buy me the war. The Dorian-Verrelli consortium is relying on securing the Polish pipeline access by the end of the quarter, Uncle, I stated, my Italian crisp and cool, though I delivered the numbers in fluent Russian, acknowledging his cultural seniority and the gravity of the stakes. Adrian Vasquez is playing the long game. He has a perfectly clean offer, legally sound, backed by legitimate finance, approved by the council. He will win slowly and predictably by acquiring the necessary permits to build a new line from the ground up, guaranteeing Western compliance. I tapped the map with a long, manicured nail, hitting a spot near Warsaw. That takes 18 months and risks every political turn. The council insists on transparency. That is their weakness. He leaned back, his massive hands resting flat on the table, the gesture conveying absolute lack of urgency. And your offer, Nastenka? You are currently backed by nothing but a disgraced name and the last of your father's liquidated assets. Why would I risk my operations and my people for a woman who just failed to secure the most prominent name in America. Because my offer is better, uncle. It's faster, and it's a personal blow that delivers collateral damage you can leverage for years. My voice dropped, becoming pure ice, infused with every ounce of professional rage I felt. Adrian Vasquez is offering stability. I am offering speed and deniability. He is tied by the red tape of the American Council. I am tied by nothing. We cut them out entirely. We secure the access through my family's pre-existing political channels in Kiev and Warsaw, bypassing their legitimate bid entirely by acquiring the existing network. We can finalize the title transfer in 3 days, exploiting a weakness in the current owner's debt structure that Adrian's clean team would never discover. I slid the final page, the one detailing the complex, almost impossibly fast payment schedule, routed through 3 layers of offshore companies and using Boris's preferred crypto transfer system, across the table. It required a network of shell companies and political favors that only the Bratva could manage, without triggering international financial alerts. It is your perfect crime, with their future as the prize. Adrian is slow and predictable. We are swift and untraceable. Furthermore, I continued, letting my fury finally sharpen my tone, Adrian Vasquez humiliated me publicly. He used his connections to destroy my legitimacy. If you help me secure this deal, uncle, we don't just gain immense wealth and control over the regional supply chain. We deliver a direct, undeniable financial wound to the new Dorian regime that will take years to recover from. We show the council that Serafina's husband, her protector, is not as untouchable as he believes. We show them that their clean expansion is a joke. He looked at the contract, then back at me, finally seeing not the disgraced woman, but the ruthless strategist he had once known. He saw the cold fire in my eyes, the professional rage that eclipsed any personal vendetta. This was pure business, execute with the force of personal hatred. He nodded slowly. The channels are open, Nastenka. But you must deliver the final payment commitment to the specific accounts by noon, Geneva time. My resources are not cheap, and they are not patient. The window of opportunity closes when Vasquez realizes his bid is stalled. I smiled, a thin, satisfied curve of my lips. The funds are already in, waiting for the political green light. Serafina Dorian thought she could silence me by taking my title. She forgot that I came from an empire older and colder than hers. She can have her precious child and her mercenary husband. I will have the power they were fighting for, and they will pay the tax of humiliation. For the next 2 hours, the penthouse office hummed with the quiet, intense, high-level activity of international illicit finance. My phone calls were cold, precise, and devoid of emotion, moving millions across 3 separate currency zones. Every detail had to be perfect. The timing of the wire transfers to trigger the debt clauses, the synchronized calls to 3 officials in Kiev, Warsaw, and Berlin to ensure the political leverage was pulled at the exact moment the money landed. I was not just moving cash, I was moving power, bypassing years of bureaucracy in a single morning. This was my true element, not the petty, emotional drama of a courtroom, but the cold, devastating logic of the marketplace. I felt fully alive, every nerve ending tingling with the intoxicating thrill of absolute control. The digital speed of the money flow was matched only by the speed of my vengeance. At precisely 11:45 a.m., 15 minutes before Boris's deadline, he finally signed the last document. The final stamp was affixed. The deal was done, irreversible, untraceable, and devastating. I walked back to the window, the crystalline mountains now looking less serene, more like the jagged tools in a perfectly organized war chest. The news had already begun to filter through my network. a quiet, professional murmur of confusion. The Dorian/Verrelli bid was dead in the water, rejected at the final hour, beaten by a competitor no one saw coming, backed by deep, shadowy Russian capital. The massive Eastern European energy expansion, the cornerstone of Adrian's strategic plan, and the symbol of Serafina's new empire, was now mine, acquired in a single, surgical strike of pure financial power. A deep, visceral satisfaction, the first I had felt in months, flowed through my veins. It wasn't enough to kill Serafina. That was too simple and too quick. I wanted to watch Serafina's perfect, powerful life unravel, one strategically severed thread at a time. The first thread was this billion-dollar blow, delivered right to Adrian's most ambitious project, a loss that would force him to explain his failure to the Council of Families at the worst possible time. Let her realize, I thought, watching the city below, that she only won the crown. I am still the one who controls the kingdom, and the first lesson in diplomacy is that the Russians always prefer an old enemy to a new neighbor. My strategy was validated. My empire was secured. The war had officially begun. Serafina. The Eastern European energy deal had collapsed. A brutal financial defeat orchestrated by the one person I had most foolishly underestimated, Anastasia Ruffo. Her quiet victory, securing the crucial pipeline access hours before our own bid, was a seismic blow to Adrian's political standing and a clear message. The war for dominance was far from over. This wasn't just a loss of billions. The deal represented critical leverage over NATO supply lines, giving the winning side immense political weight in both Brussels and Washington. The true nature of the battle was geopolitical, and we were losing. The conference room felt like a freezer. Adrian was on the phone, his Spanish sharp and lethal as he spoke to our European logistics manager. I watched him, memorizing the severe lines of his profile, the tension in his rigid posture. This mess, compromised by high-ranking Russian officials and a trail of corruption that led straight to old KGB assets, was too dangerous to be handled from Venice. "I have to go, Serafina," he said, hanging up the phone and turning, his silver eyes locking onto mine. The contracts were rigged using shell corporations that lead directly back to Boris Volkov's network. We need eyes on the ground in Eastern Europe to untangle the bribery trail and apply the counter-leverage. A 2-week delay, and this deal is locked down forever. I crossed the room, my hand finding the small of his back, feeling the protective, hard muscle beneath his shirt. "How long?" "3 days, maybe 4. I will take the secure jet tonight, in and out, fast, quiet, and absolutely lethal. My contacts in Eastern Europe are essential for this counterattack, but they are compartmentalized. If anything happens, only my chief counsel, and you know the encryption keys." His voice was low, his anxiety palatable despite his attempts at control. "You're walking into her trap," I whispered, the words catching. "She wants you exposed, politically weak." "She wants the council to think I'm a failure," he countered, his hands coming up to cup my face, forcing me to meet his gaze. The fierceness in his eyes returned, demanding my focus. "I will prove her wrong, but I need you to promise me something now. You hold the line here, you stay untouchable. Lionel stays locked down. No visitors, no movement. You manage the corporate affairs and handle the legal preparation for Matteo's inevitable move against the merger. I need you safe so I can focus on bringing this war chest back. I need you to be the face of absolute, unshakable stability for the entire organization. Do you understand the scope of the trust I am placing in you?" I nodded, swallowing the rising panic. The weight of running the entire consortium, Dorian and Vasquez combined, was crushing, but Adrian's trust was a more powerful force. I felt the last lingering threads of the wife persona snap, replaced by the cold, clear logic of the Don's daughter. "I understand," I stated, drawing on the cold resolve of my father's blood. "You go. I rule." We retreated to the master suite for our final hour. Lionel was asleep, a perfect, oblivious counterpoint to the impending storm. Adrian watched him, his gaze heavy with unspoken vows, before turning to me. He pulled me into his arms, a possessive, absolute embrace that felt like the last safe place in the world. "I hate this separation, Mia Cara," he murmured, his Spanish soft against my hair, inhaling deeply. "Since I took you, I haven't wanted you more than 3 feet from my side. Promise me you will not take any unnecessary risks, no matter the provocation. Use the distance and the lawyers as a shield." "I know," I admitted, clinging to the familiar, unyielding steel of his body. "I'm used to fighting beside you. This silence, it feels wrong. But you are right. Stability is the weapon now." He pulled back just enough, his gaze intent. "This is not silence. This is trust. I trust your strategic mind more than anyone, and I trust you with my life's greatest acquisition." He nodded toward the crib. "Lionel, remember that." His kiss was an immediate, desperate consumption, a primal blend of farewell and affirmation. It was a hunger fueled by necessity, an attempt to bridge the distance before it opened. My hands fisted in his shirt, pulling him tighter, my body responding instantly to his demanding pressure. Our lovemaking was intense and essential, a beautiful, violent storm of shared necessity. It was a wordless promise that no geography or threat could sever the bond we had forged in fire. We lay tangled in the sheets afterward, the physical exertion easing the emotional strain. "I will return, Serafina," Adrian promised, his voice low in the quiet room. "I will be back by the time this crib is empty and you miss me enough to burn down a city." "I already miss you," I confessed. "Hurry back, we have a life waiting for you." The secure car carrying Adrian pulled away at midnight. I didn't watch it go. I stood in the library, the glow of the desk lamp illuminating the mahogany table where he had left his war chest. A list of sensitive contacts, encrypted keys, and the full financial files on the compromised pipeline. He was gone. Now I was the Don. The fear was instantly eclipsed by the sharp, cold necessity of my new role. I dressed in a razor-sharp suit, a dark charcoal gray that demanded respect, pulled my hair into a commanding coil, and gathered the security detail. "No one leaves the grounds without my express order," I commanded the lead officer, my voice steady and without inflection. "This estate is a sovereign territory under threat. All patrols are doubled. Any breach is to be treated as hostile." Then I turned to the files. Adrian's notes were meticulous, but my focus wasn't the logistics of his mission. It was the political theater here at home. I recognized the names of the bribed Kiev officials, minor players, but their families were vulnerable targets. My first strategic move was to initiate a counter-leverage play, spending the next 4 hours calling my own network. The global financiers and political fixers who specialized in moving influence without bloodshed. I accessed untraceable data on Minister Kovalchuk's family assets in Geneva and their children's schools. Simultaneously, I started drafting preemptive legal challenges to solidify the Dorian-Vasquez merger, knowing Matteo would use Adrian's political stumble as an excuse to challenge corporate control and Lionel's inheritance. Adrian was fighting a war of retribution against Anastasia. I was fighting a war of systemic dominance. I was using his absence to prove that the Dorian-Vasquez empire was secure, no matter the circumstances. When the sun finally rose, casting a cold, clean light into the room, I was still at the table. Lionel's nanny brought him down for his morning feeding. I didn't stop my work. I balanced the spreadsheets detailing billions in global holdings on my lap while my son nursed, the cold logic of the numbers contrasting sharply with the soft, perfect weight of my child. The scent of vanilla and powder mixed with the metallic tang of ambition. I was Doña Serafina, the protector, the mother, the wife, and the CEO. My phone chimed. A text from Adrian, already in flight. Adrian, I am over the Atlantic. Did you sleep? I looked at the files, then at my son, and typed my reply, assured and brief. Serafina, no, I'm in your chair. The council is in session. Kiev is next. Hurry back. I have everything under control. Adrian Vasquez had gone to war for our future. I would stay here and rule the world in his absence. Anastasia had made the mistake of leaving the throne momentarily empty, forgetting that the Dorian never hesitated to seize control. The war had escalated, and I was ready. Adrian. I stood in a secure, soundproofed room in a Kiev safe house. The trail of the collapsed energy deal was poisoned. The shell corporations were professional, designed to look like a clean financial maneuver. But I knew Anastasia was involved, and I needed proof that would stand up in the council. My counteragent, Krachenko, a former SBU operative, slid a hard drive across the table. She's good, Vasquez. The original contracts were clean, but she didn't use cash. She used information as the currency for the bribe. I inserted the drive into the air-gap terminal. Kravchenko had breached the personal accounts of the two key government ministers who had abruptly flipped their votes. What appeared on the screen were not wire transfers, but heavily encrypted files containing data dumps from an offshore server detailing their weaknesses. The contents? I asked, my voice low and grating. Dirt, Kravchenko replied. Minister Yevtushenko had his son's admission to an American university secured, paid for by a foundation linked to Rufo's Geneva bank. Minister Volodin? His mistress was given a controlling interest in a London fashion house, also tied to Rufo's offshore assets. The trade was clean, precise, and entirely non-monetary on the surface. It was a masterclass in political leverage, proving Anastasia's financial genius was now being weaponized against me on a global scale. I scrolled through the metadata. The documents detailing the transfers and legal agreements were timestamped exactly 72 hours before the final signing ceremony. It was a perfectly executed political sabotage, reliant on cold leverage instead of bloody intimidation. It wasn't brute force. It was intellectual terrorism. But there was one final damning piece of evidence that Kravchenko had isolated. An encrypted message sent from a burner phone in Nice. It was a one-line confirmation to a corporate fixer, confirming the successful execution of the bribery scheme, signed simply, A.R. Anastasia Rufo. The confirmation hit me with the force of a physical blow. She hadn't just stumbled onto an opportunity. She had methodically dismantled a $30 billion agreement, jeopardizing my geopolitical standing and severely undercutting my influence with the council. She had moved from a competitor to an existential threat. I copied the files, secured the encrypted token, and prepared my immediate return. The council needed to see this evidence, and Anastasia needed to realize that the moment she stepped into my political sandbox, she forfeited her life. I had the smoking gun. Now I just needed the right moment to fire. I knew Serafina would be holding the fort, preparing the corporate defenses against Matteo's inevitable legal attack. What I didn't know was what poisonous weapon he had chosen to deploy against her, Serafina. The silence in the palazzo was suffocating. 4 days felt like 4 years. Adrian's absence had created a vacuum, and I knew an animal was already scenting weakness. The inevitable came not with a gunshot, but with a formal leather-bound legal summons hand-delivered by a registered courier, a petition from Matteo Vasquez. I scanned the document in the drawing room. It sought liberal, unsupervised visitation and shared custodial decision-making for Lionel. This request was a thinly veiled attempt to gain access to Adrian's greatest vulnerability. However, it was the attached rider that made my blood run cold, turning the legal threat into a personal war. This rider listed the evidence Matteo intended to submit to prove my instability, recklessness, and unfitness as a sole caregiver, referencing events that only a handful of people, and Matteo's spy, could have compiled. His dossier was a masterpiece of malice. When I looked closer at the rider, my hands started to shake, less from fear and more from pure, concentrated rage. Matteo hadn't just compiled evidence, he had crafted a narrative intended to destroy my credibility in the eyes of any neutral court. The first strike detailed the Miami incident with surgical precision. It wasn't just a brief mention of a dispute. It included detailed police and medical reports, highlighting the severity of the confrontation, the necessity of my use of lethal force in self-defense, and the subsequent kidnapping of Lionel by Dante, all maliciously framed as fleeing law enforcement after an illegal firearm discharge. It painted me as a fugitive from justice. The second piece of evidence was even more damning and utterly unbelievable in its detail: the Sicilian shootout. This included the full forensic report from the safe house, photographic evidence of the carnage, and the confirmed fatalities, with my direct involvement and presence highlighted in bold text. It was a precise chronological detailing of the bloodiest night of my recent life, proving my intimate and undeniable participation in violence. How he obtained those sealed forensics was a question that needed a lethal answer. The second piece of evidence was even more damning and utterly unbelievable in its detail: the Sicilian shootout. This included the full forensic report from the safe house, photographic evidence of the carnage, and the confirmed fatalities, with my direct involvement and presence highlighted in bold text. It was a precise chronological detailing of the bloodiest night of my recent life, proving my intimate and undeniable participation in violence. How he obtained those sealed forensics was a question that needed a lethal answer. Finally, there was the section on my Dorian involvement. This included testimonies from former associates, some coerced, some bought, confirming my direct high-level involvement in managing the family's international operations, conclusively proving my long-term immersion in the operations of the 'Ndrangheta. Matteo wasn't merely questioning my parenting, he was exposing me as a criminal figure, unfit to raise a child in civil society. The threat was clear: drop my opposition to his liberal access, or I would face an immediate public and international custody battle that would drag my entire blood-soaked past into the light. Matteo was interested in control. If he secured unsupervised access, Lionel would become the perfect leverage point against Adrian. I could never allow that. I immediately summoned Giacomo, my most trusted legal operative, through the secure line. "Giacomo," I said, my voice sharp and controlled, "Matteo has filed for custody access." I outlined the documents and the damning nature of the evidence. Giacomo was silent, processing the sheer scale of the risk. "Donna Serafina," he finally responded, his voice grave, "this is a serious threat. The American court system takes a dim view of any parent involved in organized crime. The shootout evidence alone could lead to an immediate ruling restricting your parental rights. A full court battle would expose everything: Adrian's involvement, the corporate structure, The lot. Matteo knows that, I murmured. He knows I cannot risk the exposure. He has issued an ultimatum: cave to his demands now, or face the court of public opinion and lose everything. Giacomo offered the only viable legal defense. We fight it. We countersue for defamation and file motions to seal the records, arguing that his evidence is illegally obtained and irrelevant to the child's welfare. We risk everything in the short term, but we protect Lionel's future. And if we lose the motion to seal, then the world knows that Adrian Vasquez married the Don's daughter, who has blood on her hands. It destroys his image, complicates the merger beyond repair, and gives the council all the justification they need to install a provisional leader, likely Matteo himself. I stood still, then picked up the phone again, my decision already cold and final. I was a Dorian. I did not surrender. We do not cave, Giacomo, I instructed. We file the countermotion now. I want a full investigative team focused on the exact source of his evidence. Who is his contact? I want his legal counsel placed under immediate surveillance. And more importantly, I paused, the true intent of my message cutting through the phone line. I want an extensive private investigation into Matteo's own financial history, his associations, and his offshore dealings. Every lie, every indiscretion, every questionable transaction he has ever made. We are not just defending Giacomo, we are preparing to bury him. Matteo had underestimated me. He had pulled me back into the shadows, and in the shadows, I knew the terrain better than he did. I walked to the nursery, kneeling beside Lionel's crib, his tiny hand wrapping around my finger. I had made a promise to Adrian and to myself. "You won't break me, Matteo," I whispered, the shadow of the Don's daughter falling across the room. "You want to fight? You want to expose my recklessness? I will show you what true, unadulterated ruthlessness looks like." The legal battle had begun. I was walking into the fire, but I intended to come out holding the scorched earth. Adrian had his mission in Eastern Europe, but my war was here in Venice, fought with paper and steel resolve. Serafina, the quiet click of the outer door, a sound only I could distinguish from the 1,000 other noises of the old palazzo, was the first true sign of peace I had experienced in 4 days. I didn't rush. I simply set the glass of chilled Amarone on the antique side table and waited, registering the data of his return, the time, the security sequence, the slight drag in his step. When Adrian finally entered the drawing room, the sight of him struck me with a familiar, painful clarity. The man who moved empires looked like a beautifully carved statue that had been dropped. His bespoke coat was rumpled, his eyes dulled by relief and the crushing mental fatigue of navigating a geopolitical minefield. He didn't speak. He just crossed the threshold and pulled me into an embrace that was less a kiss of passion and more an anchor dropped in turbulent water. It was absolute crushing pressure, his cheek cold against the warmth of my hair. I felt the tension radiating off him, the lingering scent of high-grade anxiety finally released. "Home," he muttered, the word a weary exhale into my neck. "Safe," I corrected, pulling back just enough to survey the damage. His body was rigid, his impeccable control frayed. "You look like hell, my love," I said, my voice low and maternal. I led him toward the sofa. He sat heavily, leaning his head back against the cushion, closing his eyes for a moment that seemed to stretch into eternity. "I have the proof," he reported, his voice gravelly. "Anastasia's fingerprints are on the sabotage, not just involvement, but the direct, documented use of political leverage against my interests. It's clean, cold, and entirely her style." He opened his eyes, the fire returning only when he spoke of his enemy. "It's enough to present to the council and make her position untenable." "Good." I responded simply, pouring him a small measure of the wine, something rich and dark to settle the restless adrenaline in his blood. I offered it to him. He took it, his long fingers brushing mine, the gesture a silent acknowledgement of the shift in power dynamics in that moment. He was the warrior returned, and I was the sanctuary. I sat beside him, watching him take the first restorative sip. And while you were securing the council, Matteo fired a legal nuclear warhead directly at my head. His eyes snapped back into focus, the exhaustion instantly burned away by alarm. Serafina, the custody filing? More than a filing, I explained, maintaining a tone that was professional and analytical. It's a comprehensive dossier. He's not just seeking visitation, he's seeking to disqualify me entirely based on instability and reckless behavior. He listed the evidence he intends to submit. I went through the 3 points, keeping my voice steady. The detailed police and medical reports from the Miami incident, painting me as a fugitive. The forensic evidence from the Sicilian shootout, proving my direct involvement in the massacre, a word I used with deliberate gravity. And finally, confirmation of my high-level management role in the Dorian operations. He has weaponized my past, I concluded, setting my glass down. It's an ultimatum. Cave to his demands for shared, unsupervised custody, or I face an international court battle that would expose our organizations to the world and immediately disqualify me as a parent in the eyes of any neutral judge. His goal is leverage over you, delivered through Lionel. Adrian took a deep breath, the sound heavy in the room. He reached for my hand, pulling it into his lap, running his thumb over my knuckles. How? He asked, his voice a low growl of pure menace. The forensic reports were sealed. Who is the rat inside Sicily? That is what Giacomo is tracking now. My guess is an old, deeply paid-off mole from the Commissione archives. Matteo's money, or Anastasia's influence, runs deeper than we thought. Adrian leaned his head back, finally allowing the full weight of the dual threat to settle. She attacks my political foundation with a clean financial blow. He attacks my familial foundation with dirty legal warfare. They are coordinating. They are a mirror image of the attack on the energy deal. Only this time, it's personal. Precisely, I agreed. And this is why we must recognize the true nature of what we are. People talk about power couples, about love and strategy. But what we have, Adrian, is something different. I moved closer, leaning my head against his shoulder. He felt like granite, dependable and immovable, yet desperately needing to shed the armor. When I look at you, I continued, speaking the raw, inconvenient truth of our existence, I don't just see my husband or the father of my son. I see a mechanism perfectly suited to counter my weaknesses, and I know you see the same in me. He tightened his grip on my hand. Tell me. Your strength is absolute control. Financial, political, structural. You build walls of steel, but those walls are predictable. Your vulnerability is legality, public image, and the need for clean, institutional influence. That's what Matteo and Anastasia exploit. I shifted, placing my other hand on his chest, feeling the steady beat of his heart beneath the fine linen. My strength is the mirror image. I possess the absolute and necessary ruthlessness to operate in the shadows you won't touch. I have the capacity for disorder. I am the poison dart in the velvet glove. When the court documents fail and the council resolutions are exhausted, I am the one who eliminates the existential threat without leaving a trace of institutional responsibility on your record. His eyes were intensely focused on mine now, the exhaustion replaced by a burning, appreciative intensity. You are my firebreak, he murmured, his breath warm against my skin, the beautiful, dangerous line in the sand. And you, I countered, tracing the sharp line of his jaw, are my shield, The moment I step into the light, as I must to fight Matteo, I rely entirely on your absolute power to ensure the judicial or political consequences never stick. I rely on your structures to absorb the shockwave of my violence. He reached up, cupping my face, his thumb stroking my cheekbone. The strategizing was over. The armor was coming off. "Serafina," he whispered, the sound a low caress. 4 days of pretending to be a legitimate businessman in the icy heart of bureaucracy. I need to be reminded of what is real. "I know," I breathed, leaning into his hand. "I need the same." The pressure of Matteo's threat, the sheer emotional violence of his attack, had been a constant grinding noise in my mind. Adrian's return was the only thing that could silence it. We moved without conscious direction, rising and leaving the world of legal briefings and council votes behind. We shed the layers of the day, the heavy coat, the tight silk, the invisible cloaks of strategy and defense, until we were nothing but skin and nerve. The bedroom was dark, save for the moonlight filtering through the heavy Venetian glass, casting long, fractured shadows across the floor. The intimacy that followed was fueled by the potent cocktail of fear, relief, and strategic purpose. It wasn't gentle. It was necessary. It was the desperate physical affirmation that, despite the chaos outside, this core, this partnership, remained intact. His kiss was possessive, demanding the assurance I had just given him. My response was fierce, answering the unspoken question of his absence with every fiber of my being. I felt the knots in his shoulders ease beneath my touch, the tension in his spine finally melting away into the sheets. For that hour, there was no Dorian, no Vasquez, no council, and no Matteo. There were only two people, intrinsically linked by a shared destiny and a child, shedding their burdens and reforging the bond that made them both stronger than they had any right to be. Afterward, Adrian lay on his back, his arm draped across his forehead, his breathing deep and even for the first time since he walked through the door. I traced the line of his collarbone, the curve of his muscle, seeing the strength that usually intimidated world leaders now rendered harmless by sleep. "We win, Serafina," he murmured, his voice thick with sleep and conviction. "We always do." "We will," I promised, leaning up to kiss his chest. I knew the battle ahead would be brutal, played out on two fronts, one in the shadow courts of finance and geopolitics, and one in the pristine, unforgiving light of the legal system. But lying next to him, feeling the absolute complementary power of our union, the fear was gone. Matteo had threatened to expose my ruthlessness. I would ensure that his only reward for that endeavor was to face the full, combined force of the Dorians' fire and the Vasquez's political earthquake. They had mistaken our love for softness. They were about to discover it was the source of our unbreakable resolve. I closed my eyes, Adrian's steady presence a heavy, comforting weight beside me, knowing that the strategic planning for Matteo's demise would begin with the sunrise. "Serafina." When I woke, Adrian's side of the bed was already cool. The sun was low, but I knew his mind was already moving. He was not a man who lingered when a decision had been made. And last night, the decision was annihilation. I found him in his study, wearing an obsidian-colored suit, on a high-level call. He spoke in clipped Russian to his chief legal counsel in Geneva. "The objective is not to win the motion, Yuri," Adrian was instructing. "The objective is to make the entire legal structure supporting the opposition collapse. I want the judge to see him not as a wronged father, but as a compromised criminal. I want the funding cut off at the source. The initial strike must be incapacitating." He ended the call and walked toward me, pouring me a cup of coffee. "The gears are turning," he stated. Yuri is mobilizing the Milan team. They are preparing the framework for the countersuit, specifically targeting the financing of Matteo's current legal action. We will not wait for him to respond to his initial filing. We strike simultaneously from an angle he is not prepared for. Good, I said. A frontal assault on custody is messy. We don't fight on his battlefield. We attack the supply line. We stood at his desk, the entire plan laid out. Matteo's position relied entirely on the illusion of stability and financial purity. I pointed to the hard copy of the Verrelli ledger. This ledger, secured with Giacomo's help, detailed every illicit transaction funneled through the Castellano network. The ledger reveals that the assets he currently controls, including the funds he is using to pay his elite legal team, are demonstrably derived from tax fraud, money laundering, and illegal commodity trading, I explained, the words tasting like victory. If his assets are frozen, his legal team walks, and his ability to continue this international harassment vanishes. Adrian leaned over the draft. The Verrelli evidence is the poison, he agreed. It destroys his credibility in a financial court, which has immediate bearing on his suitability as a guardian. He pulled a separate, classified file toward him. This was the evidence he had secured in Eastern Europe, the documented proof of Anastasia's direct involvement in the sabotage of the Caspian pipeline deal, and her use of shell companies in the Black Sea region. Here is the lever, Adrian continued. Anastasia has funded Matteo's legal actions. The evidence links her illegal activities directly back to Castellano Holdings, Matteo's companies. We claim that Matteo's custody suit is not about Lionel, but is an act of industrial and political warfare, orchestrated by Anastasia and funded through his fraudulent network. By connecting the financial fraud, Matteo, to the political sabotage, Anastasia, we shift the narrative from a simple custody dispute to a documented, high-stakes conspiracy, I concluded. The judge will be forced to rule on the integrity of the international financial system, and in that scenario, the solution is always the same: quarantine the contamination. The filing was executed with surgical precision. The documents, hundreds of pages of forensic accounting, translated wiretaps, and Adrian's politically explosive evidence, were submitted to the Milan court via diplomatic courier. The silence that followed was deafening. Matteo's lawyers were blindsided, hit with a legal force they didn't know we possessed. The filing was executed with surgical precision. The documents, hundreds of pages of forensic accounting, translated wiretaps, and Adrian's politically explosive evidence, were submitted to the Milan court via diplomatic courier. The silence that followed was deafening. Matteo's lawyers were blindsided, hit with a legal force they didn't know we possessed. The next day, we were scheduled for an emergency hearing, called by Judge Bianchi, to address our urgent motion for the immediate freeze of Castellano Holdings' assets. The courtroom felt exposed and amplified. I sat beside Adrian, his presence a fortress. Matteo was there, pale and furious, flanked by his immaculately dressed lawyers, whose confidence had visibly evaporated. He stared at me with pure venom, a look I returned with absolute chilling calm. He had miscalculated. He had forgotten I was a Dorian. Judge Bianchi was an elderly woman known for her strict adherence to procedure. She looked only at the documents piled on her bench. This court is not concerned with political vendettas or international business disputes, she began, her voice dry and authoritative. However, the evidence presented by the respondents, Serafina Dorian Vasquez and Adrian Vasquez, regarding the funding sources of the petitioner, Matteo Castellano, constitutes a prima facie case of systemic fraud and tax evasion that impacts the jurisdiction of this court. She fixed her gaze on Matteo's lead counsel. Counselor, The sheer volume of material, particularly the Verrelli financial audit and the linked political intelligence, raises serious questions as to the legitimacy of your client's entire financial structure. This court cannot proceed with a custody hearing when the petitioner's ability to finance said hearing is predicated upon demonstrably criminal enterprise. Matteo's lawyer attempted to interject, his voice trembling slightly. Your Honor, this is fabricated evidence. It is a clear attempt to distract from the central issue of the child's welfare. Matteo's lawyer attempted to interject, his voice trembling slightly. Your Honor, this is fabricated evidence. It is a clear attempt to distract from the central issue of the child's welfare. Save your theatrics for a jury, counselor, Judge Bianchi snapped, cutting him off. I am not distracted. I am concerned with the verifiable fact that the funds maintaining your retainer may be the proceeds of crime. Until that issue is resolved, your client is compromised. She picked up the final sheet of paper. Adrian's hand briefly touched mine, a kinetic warning. This was it. Therefore, she stated, her voice ringing out in the silenced courtroom, the motion filed by the respondents for an immediate and temporary freeze of all assets linked to Castellano Holdings and the petitioner, Matteo Castellano, based on the documented evidence of fraud and the subsequent link to funding this suit as a conspiracy, is hereby granted. The word granted was a physical blow to Matteo. His jaw dropped. Judge Bianchi continued. All funds, including operating capital, personal accounts, and corporate assets tied to Castellano Holdings and its subsidiaries, are frozen pending a full forensic audit by the Guardia di Finanza. Furthermore, until the legitimacy of the petitioner's financial stability is established, and the evidence regarding the political conspiracy is fully evaluated, the custody petition filed by Mr. Castellano is indefinitely stayed. She slammed her gavel down once. Bang. Court is adjourned. We did not wait for the chaos to erupt around Matteo and his now useless legal team. Adrian and I rose and walked out of the courtroom with the quiet dignity of people who had ended the war before it truly began. Outside, Adrian paused, turning to face me, a sign of deep and abiding satisfaction on his face. Frozen, he stated softly. His holdings, his political access, his entire network of influence. They can't pay for the gas in their cars, let alone a team of international litigators. I leaned into him, the victory a deep, humming satisfaction. He used the law to try and hurt us, I said. We used the law to financially cripple him, discredit his political ally, and secure our son. The Castellanos are finished. He wrapped his arm around my waist, pulling me close. A beautiful application of force, my love, he murmured. The shield absorbed the blow, and the sword delivered the final clean cut.